So, we sung a song this morning. The first one was 10,000 Reasons. I can never hear that song again and it not take me back to a place. Back in the spring of 2016, I, with a group of men, went into Northeast Correctional Complex. It's part of a Kairos ministry. And it's a ministry that goes in and spends the weekend in the prison ministering to a group of 46 men. It's a very intense, it's called a short course in Christianity. And they listen to a lot of talks, and they listen to a lot of songs, and they have discussions in small group format around a table. The gentleman sitting to my left sat there all weekend. We had a lot of conversations. He was not a Christian. Matter of fact, he was one of those people that felt he was beyond forgiveness. He told me, I've committed the unpardonable sin. Now, when I say that to a bunch of Christians, you think one thing. He was thinking something totally different. He says, I took another man's life. That's unforgivable. That song, 10,000 Reasons, we probably sung that song at least 6 times that weekend. And we were standing on a break, and the band was playing that song. And he simply made the comment, I like that song. For someone who was not a Christian, who felt they were beyond forgiveness, that song and that weekend opened his mind to the light that was open to him. He gave his heart to Christ. And me being the pessimist that I tend to be, just wondered, was it real? Well, I went back. I was in the spring. I went back in the fall. And they call them residents, inmates that have gone through the program. They can come in and they can serve the men that are going through. They can serve the food and they can put it together. And I went in, and sure enough, there he was, serving the men going through the program. So he sees me, he hugs me. I said, well, how's it going? And he simply said, I'm trying to live it. I'm trying to live it. So this kind of relates to what we're going to talk about this morning. One of the things that they emphasize so much as you're preparing to go into the prison is they call it the 4 L's. L, 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 L. Listen, listen, love, love. Nothing else. And yes, these men have done horrendous things. They're in the darkness. We don't need to tell them they're in the darkness. They know it. Our job is to show the light. To show the light. So anyway, let's jump in here. Sorry about that. So we're going to talk about it. It does kind of relate. So this is one of those. Sometimes when speakers get up, they like to have some feedback on, amen, brother, preach it, brother. This is not one of those kind of messages. The goal that I want to have with you today is to take you on a journey that I'm currently on. A journey to make you think about how you interact with the world around you. You may take this and do nothing with it. But my hope is you'll think deeply about what we're talking about here today. You see, I've been part of, let's just call it conservative evangelical Christianity since, well, forever. Forever. Since I was born. And you know, there's a lot of great things about evangelical America. I mean, sometimes we feel like we got to be defenders of the truth. We got to put the word out there. We got to take a public and aggressive stand for godly biblical principles. And I would say the conservative evangelical group within America has done a lot of that. You know, I remember back when I was growing up, I mean, we were against a lot of stuff. We were against homosexual rights. We were against, let me make sure I get this right. We were against the ERA, but we were for the NRA. If I didn't get those right. ERA, for those of you who are younger, was the Equal Rights Amendment. That was why we would be against equal rights for women. I'm not quite sure, but we had probably good reasons. I was small, good reasons for that. And I remember there was one large mainstream denomination that was against Disney. We were against the happiest place on earth. And there was a good theological reason for that. But we were against it. We were against a lot of stuff. We believed we were the defenders of truth. We had to protect the truth. We had to make sure that people that were doing the wrong things knew that they were doing the wrong things. I would say, and I've used this word in my secular job before, but I think we were largely the problem spotters. We were really good at making a point and telling people when they were wrong. And theologically, we were right. But as I've grown, as I've matured, and now that I'm in my 50s, I'm thinking about things maybe a little bit differently. I mean, conservative evangelical Christian, I are one. Hands down, no doubt about it. But you know, it's easy to point the finger and say, you're doing it wrong. It's much more difficult to guide somebody to something new, something better. Trying to convince you that you're wrong, at least telling you, that's easy. But equipping you to do what's right, much, much harder. Trying to make you feel guilty about what you're doing, that's easy. Instructing you on what is right, much, much harder. So let me give you a haunting question that's been haunting me for the past months that I'm now going to haunt you with. And it's this, and we're going to talk about this morning. Is it more important to make a point, or is it more important to make a difference? And that kind of links into the Kairos story. It would be the easiest thing in the world for me to tell this young man to my left, you sinned grossly. But you know what? If I were to say, the Bible says, thou shalt not murder, I would be theologically correct. But it would have made no difference in the life of James. None. It would have been correct. The point would have been made, but it would have made no difference. So I believe in evangelical America, in many cases, not all cases, in many cases, we've got it wrong. We've been more concerned about making a point than making a difference. Now, I ran this by Linda, who always corrects me a little bit, and she says, but we ought to really be make a point by making a difference. And that's absolutely right. We make our point by making a difference. We can't be content with simply telling somebody they're in the darkness. You know what? They already know that. Our job is to get them out of the darkness. And that's a whole lot harder. All right, so we're going to jump in here and we're going to talk about this. So part of what's put me down this path is we're as polarized in this country as I've ever seen us in my lifetime. We have opinions absolutely everywhere. We have opinions that are this far apart on almost any issue you can possibly think about. And you know, one of the greatest things, you ought to get ready, you need to write this down. One of the greatest things about being an American, one of the greatest things is we don't have to know what we're talking about to talk about it. Am I agree with that? No, not anybody in this room, but people out there, we don't have to know what we're talking about to talk about it. Said another way, we don't have to have an informed opinion to inform others of what our opinion is. Am I right? All right, so maybe that's going to be the only one. All right. Am I saying you shouldn't have an opinion on issues? Absolutely not. You should have an opinion. Am I saying you shouldn't share your opinion? No, I'm not. I'm saying you should share your opinion. You should do it in the correct way. And, you know, Jesus came into a world that was very divided as well. You know, you had the Romans on one side, you had the Pharisees and the Jewish government on the other, and you had the everyday person and you had the tax collectors. It was a very divisive time. And, you know, I think there's some things that we can learn from Jesus and from Paul. There's literally dozens of examples of what I'm about to talk about in the New Testament. We're going to pick a couple. But they were able to be effective in a very, very divided world. So I believe that the church, CrossPoint Church, can be a bridge to bringing communities together. But we've got to be very, very specific and intentional and strategic about how we go about doing it. And part of that has to do with how you share your opinion on some of the divisive things that are in our culture today. So let's just jump in here. We're going to take a fresh look at a couple of things. I mean, a lot of you have been in church for a very, very long time. So Jesus and Paul, first thing is they formed personal relationships with those that they disagreed with most. They didn't just throw out a grenade and say, "You're wrong," and walk away. Matter of fact, they didn't even say that they were wrong. Great example of this is it's in Acts chapter 17, and I'm not going to take you there, toward the middle part of the chapter. And it's where Paul goes into Athens. And to give you a little bit of context, Paul was raised in the strictest of Jewish traditions. He was the Pharisee of Pharisees. He knew the law inside and out. And one of the primary pieces of the law that every good Jewish boy learns is that thou shalt have no graven images, no idols. That was one of the big no-nos. Matter of fact, they took this so seriously that the men who copied the Old Testament over and over again, they were very concerned about even writing the word God as they were copying, because they were so concerned that that would become an image. And God was really clear: have no idols, no graven images, no idols made by man. So Paul walks into Athens, a very religious city in that day. And everywhere he went, he would see these graven images, these images that were carved to their various gods, Greek gods and Roman gods. And it's probably hard for me to describe for you how offended Paul had to be by that. So Paul is out spreading the gospel, and the easiest possible sermon for Paul to preach would be You shouldn't have any of these idols. There's only one God. Get rid of these idols. These are wrong. And you know what? He would have been theologically correct. He would have been right. But it would have made no difference. So what did he do? Paul was a smart guy. So he went around the city and he found this statue it was called To the Unknown God. See, they were so, in Athens, they were so afraid that they would offend one of the gods. They had this one idol in place in case they had missed one. And if he happened to show up one day, we're ready for you. Okay. So Paul has an idea. He starts his sermon something like this. He says, hey, I notice all of you are religious people. You know what? I am too. We have something in common. And he said, you know this unknown God? I know who he is. And then he went on not to preach that idols are wrong. He went on to preach Jesus Christ and the resurrection from the dead. Now, when he finished his sermon, most of them said, you're an idiot, I'm done, I'm walking away. But there was a handful that said, I think I need to hear more about this. So they continued the conversation. You see, Paul looked to establish common ground with these folks. He didn't lead with what was theologically correct. He led with what they had in common. And his goal was not to make a point so that they had heard the truth. His intention was to make a difference. So he chose a different tact. Secondly, Jesus or Paul didn't judge unbelievers for behaving like unbelievers. The church gets this backwards. The church, I will say mostly in my lifetime, has made a habit of telling people outside the church what they're doing wrong. And they're correct about that. They're making a point. They're not making a difference. Paul said it like this. What point do I have judging unbelievers? It's none of my business. So if you take notes or you write anything down, this is going to be the one thing I want you to write down this morning. The church shines the brightest when Christians act like Christians. And they police their own behavior. We're called to judge one another. When it says judge not, it's not universal. That's outsiders. We are to police our own behavior. And why is that a good idea? Well, it's good for us when we challenge one another. But it also turns on the light that helps those in darkness see a better way. The church is at its finest. It shines the brightest when Christians act like Christians. And we police our own behavior. You know, so some critic may look at me and say, well Keith, does that mean we don't care about how people behave outside of the church? We don't care about that? Of course we do. But we want to make a difference. We don't want to make a point. Two different things. So, Jesus and Paul formed relationships. They didn't judge people outside of the church. And they were not concerned with guilt by association. For those of you who read your Bible, what was Jesus' reputation? He was the friend of tax collectors and sinners. And that wasn't a compliment. Okay? I mean, one of his reputation was that he spent way too much time with the people that he shouldn't be spending time with. Now, so did the fact that, I mean, this is an obvious question, but a lot of times we miss the obvious. Was the fact that Jesus spent time with tax collectors Should that be interpreted to say it is right to cheat people on their taxes? No. Did the fact that Jesus spent time with sinners mean that he was condoning their sin? If you asked Jesus that question, he would say, of course not. Of course not. Sin is what's going to cost me my life. Sin is going to nail me to a cross. The fact that I spend time with them, am I condoning their sin? Are you kidding me? I spend time with them because I want to reach them. I want to make a difference for them. I'm shining the light in the darkness. They know they're in the darkness. I'm showing them the way out. So Jesus, I'm going to point to two very specific, very, very familiar points of Scripture, and then I'm going to be done. This is what Jesus said in Matthew chapter 14. We are the light of the world. We are the light of the world. Implication here, the world's dark. The world is in trouble. God has graciously provided a light in the darkness. You should consider yourself a flashlight. You are the flashlight to show the way out of the darkness. Now, so let me back up just a step. Who did Jesus have the most trouble with in his day? Who did he butt heads with the most? Starts with a P. Pharisees. Yeah, the perpetual enemy of the New Testament, the Pharisees. But you know what? If you set Jesus and the Pharisees down side by side and had a conversation, what you'd find is they were theologically aligned. They believed that there was one God. They believed that God created everything. They believed that God owned everything. They believed that it's good to take care of the poor. You could go right down the line. And theologically, they agreed. Where they butted heads to the point of Christ's death was in approach, was in method, how Jesus ministered versus what they thought should happen. Theologically, they were aligned. So Jesus said, we are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on a stand and it gives light to everyone in the house. Now, pay really, really close attention to this next verse. For us conservative evangelical types, this is hard stuff. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good, let's say it together, deeds, your actions, and glorify your Father in heaven. You mean I just can't put a billboard out on the highway and say, turn or burn or you're going to hell? Isn't that a lot simpler? I get a lot more people, I get it done, I can get on with my day. Makes a point, but it makes no difference. Let your light shine before everybody, that they may see your good deeds, your good actions, how you are as a husband, how you are as a wife, how you are with your children, how you are with your family, how you manage your money, how you give your money, that they may see your good deeds. When they see your good deeds, they're seeing there's a path to a better way. It's the light in the darkness. So maybe, and Jesus was reading their thoughts, so I think this is why you see the next verse. He said, so is this really all just about being good to people? Isn't that really, is that all? So I said, what about this holiness and righteousness and all those other things and the big T truth? What about that? Can we just ignore that? To which Jesus answered their question before they had to ask it. He said, don't think I've come to abolish the law or the prophets. I've not come to abolish them, but fulfill them. In other words, the way you get to truth, the way you get to holiness and righteousness is by living it, not by saying it, but by living it. All right. Yeah, I'm going to stop right there. If there's a second thing I want you to take away, that I think many times in evangelical Christian America we've gotten wrong. I've gotten wrong. It's not my job to point out the darkness. It's not my job. It's my job to be the light in the darkness. So now let's look at Paul. Paul in Colossians 4, he's talking to Christians. And he says, be wise in the way you act toward outsiders. Now, let me explain this word outsiders just a little bit. This is just his terminology. What he's saying is this is not about good people versus evil people, not versus good people versus bad people. It's about people that are inside the faith, Christians, believers, and those outside. Jesus is very clear on how we're to view people outside the faith. We're to view them as captive. Not bad, captive. Our job is to set them free. All human beings have worth. Even pick someone, maybe it's in the media, maybe it's your next door neighbor. Think of the person that you disagree with most, philosophically or whatever. You just disagree with that person the most. Maybe you don't even think that person belongs in this country. Maybe. Every single person that you ever come in contact with is immortal. Every single person. This is bigger than an American thing. Every person is immortal. They will live forever. Now, should we take that seriously? I think so. That's why Jesus died. Okay, so be wise in the way you act toward outsiders, making the most of every opportunity. So any chance you have an opportunity to influence someone, be very careful about the words that you say. Because so many times I have seen people make a point that they believed in so deeply. And maybe even they're right. But the way they made that point destroyed their influence with that person. Destroyed their influence. And that's where Paul gets to next. Let your conversation be always full of grace. Full of, what does the word full mean here? Overflowing like it can't hold anymore. Our conversations with people that are different than us, that see the world different than us. Our conversation should be full of grace. I will go so far as to say, your friends, if they heard you have this conversation, it should be so full of grace that they don't know where you stand on a particular issue. Seasoned with salt. Salt here, I think, is a reference to truth, the law. How many of you would be like me and don't raise your hand? Say that many times in many churches, we got this exactly the opposite. Our conversations are full of salt, seasoned with grace. What does that look like? almost want to turn my back as I make this next statement. Full of salt. You're evil, you're bad, you're doing it wrong, you're a sinner, you're going to hell. Oh, by the way, come to Jesus, and there's forgiveness. Full of salt. Not wrong, it's true, but it makes a point. It doesn't make a difference. Jesus came to make a difference. Full of salt. Grace, salt. Full of grace means you engage the person, you reach out relationally, you build a relational bridge, you find things in common so that they will see the light that is in you. And they will come to know what you know and will become a light to others. But so many times, and it's so much easier to spew out the salt, right as it may be, but it hinders the ability to influence that person. I mean, I've seen church signs that say something like this: we're not called to be successful, we're called to be obedient. Salt seasoned with grace. We're actually called to be obedient and successful. But it's easy to make a point. It's much, much more difficult to make a difference. So guys, I want to close. Let's be the light. Let's live our life in a way that is attractive. Let's live our life in a way that people will look at you and they say, you know, I'm not sure I agree with everything they believe, but boy, they're a good person. I need to understand more about what's different. Or, you know, I don't know that I agree with everything that they say, but boy, I sure hope my son or daughter finds one and marries them, because they're really, really good people. They mean what they say. They're committed. Or, you know, I don't know that I believe everything that they believe, but I had a boss once that was one of those Christians. It's the best boss I ever had. They were fair. Or maybe you're a boss and you say, you know, I don't quite get this Christian thing, but man, I want to hire all of them that I possibly can, because, you know, when I'm not around, they work even harder. It's like they're working for somebody else. That's being the light. That's being the light. So guys, let's build relational bridges. Let's not be worried about guilt by association. Let's get out there. Let's have our conversations that are full of grace to the point that our friends think we've moved over to the other side. Okay? Because we're trying to build a bridge to the truth. Grace before truth. Full of grace, seasoned with truth, not the other way around. All right? So you guys have a wonderful, wonderful afternoon. Go out there and find a place to be the light. All right? You are dismissed. Thank you.